A very warm welcome to the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show. And today's show is British Sports Reporter of the Year 1998, which celebrates the life of a double winner of the British Sports Journalist of the Year award. And he was also honoured by the prestigious Variety Club of Great Britain with their Silver Heart Trophy for his contribution to sports journalism. He is also twice winner of the Sports Story of the Year award, the only journalist ever to win the accolade twice. He is one of the most influential football columnists for over 4 decades, one of the most acclaimed investigative journalists for his generation on the London Evening News, Daily Mail, Daily Mirror, Daily Express, Daily Star, Daily Express and BT Sport. Yes, folks, it gives me immense pleasure to welcome on the show Harry Harris. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Yes, pleasure to be here. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers indeed. And the pleasure's all mine. Enjoy that champagne cocktail. It looks absolutely fantastic. Well, let's just start from the beginning. Of course, like all kids, and me included as well, of course, you wanted to be a professional footballer. However, your careers advisor at school told you weren't going to make it. How kind of him, Harry. That was a lovely thing to say. And so you decided to become a reporter instead and joined a good sports college with a decent journalism course. Some inspiration there, Harry, of course. But what was the inspiration behind becoming a reporter, and how was that journalism course? How good was it?
Well, I went to Harlow, really, as things progressed, I couldn't believe that not being able to be a footballer. I was a goalkeeper, not a very good one. In fact, my mum wrote a letter to Bill Nicholson, got a reply signed by him.
Wow.
And I had a trial at Spurs, but I was a year under Terry Brisley and Dennis Rofe and played in the school team. And the scouts came along and wanted to sign those two and not me. But I couldn't believe that going into sports journalism, football journalism, that they'd actually pay me to go and watch football matches. I couldn't believe it. Well, there you go. So
absolutely,
that was the inspiration.
Oh, yeah, getting paid for anything and getting paid well is a great inspiration. I follow that tact as well, Harry. So there we are, two peas from the same pod. You then joined straight out of college the North London Herald. And I think sometimes they call it the Tottenham Herald, actually, but it's the North London Herald. And after a few months working at the North London Herald, you were sent on another journalism course. I love this story. When you came back, the sports editor had moved on and your boss asked the whole office, anyone know anything about sport? You put your hand up and your boss said, all right, you're the new sports editor. So from humble beginnings, this is how your career began. I mean, that's a fabulous story, isn't it? It doesn't happen these days.
Not these days, no, but that was what it was like back then. You really can't make it up. And there I was, as almost a trainee journalist, suddenly becoming a sports editor. But it was lovely. I really enjoyed it. And, the offices were a few hundred yards from the Tottenham Stadium, as it was then.
Yes.
White Hart Lane, although White Hart Lane was where Haringey played. Not very many people know that.
That's a good story.
It was great then to be able to deal on a regular basis with Bill Nicholson. You couldn't get a better grounding, the best Spurs manager there ever was. And there I was in his office every week. Although I don't know whether you know the story, but Dave Leggett, who was my predecessor there, introduced me to Bill, and he said, this is your new local reporter. And he said to me, well, Harry, pleased to meet you. Tell me what you want. And I said, I'd like to pop in and see you every week and get a chat about the first team reserves and see how things are going so I can have an update every week. And he looked at me completely puzzled and said, I saw your predecessor once a year.
Wow.
Not once a week. He said, well, let's see how we go. Come along on Monday and we'll take it from there.
Well, of course, as you know, in football, even at these clubs like Tottenham, any club, things change every week, don't they? So to go every week, sensible, I think. So your predecessor.
It wasn't one for. It was a bit of a shock for Bill, but
yes.
We met every week, and he gave me the kind of insight that I needed for the local paper, and of course, having that insight on a weekly basis, the Evening Standard, Evening News, all the national papers.
Yes.
I couldn't get rid of them. They were hovering all around. They wanted to know what was going on. So it fast tracked me to the nationals. It was fabulous. But he was such a wonderful character, Bill. And I ended up writing his autobiography. Not that he
Yes.
wanted to. I had to persuade him to do so. But there's so many Bill Nicholson stories. I mean, they're just unbelievable. I mean, I was always in awe, sitting in there in the waiting room, waiting to see him. And but he was always very welcoming. But
Mm.
I mean, I had to catch the bus from where I lived in Gants Hill to go up to Tottenham, and then my first port of call on the Monday was to see him. And one day there was, I don't know, a strike or whatever it was, and I was late. It's the first time ever. And I sat there and I apologised profusely, but he didn't like people who were late, and obviously he had a tight schedule.
Mm.
And he said, don't you get an alarm clock? Haven't you got a watch? I said, well, I'm only a young guy, can't afford a watch, and all this sort of stuff. Turned up the next Monday, an hour ahead of schedule, sitting there, and I came in. And before I said anything, he said, before you do a thing, he said, got something for you. And he handed over a watch in a case, and I opened it up. It was inscribed by Inter Milan to
Wow.
Bill Nicholson. It was the presentation to Bill, and he gave it to me and said, there you go,
Wow.
don't be late again.
Wow. I mean, if that's not inspiring to make sure you turn up at the ground early on, I don't know what is. Have you still got the watch now? Of course you have.
I have no idea where it is. It's such a long time ago.
Yes, I think things go missing, don't you? We all move and everything else,
Yeah.
life changes, things get lost. But what a great story. I mean, that obviously set a nice relationship up between you both. And I would think as well, every Monday morning would be different depending on the Saturday afternoon's result, the atmosphere at the club. What was it like between a win and a loss? Forget the draws.
Well, he was a total professional. It didn't really matter whether
Yeah.
if he'd won, he was still in a bad mood. So there'd have been something. I mean, Glenn Hoddle told me a story once when he first was
Yes.
a junior at Spurs, and the one thing he didn't ever want to do was bump into Bill Nicholson.
Oh,
They were
wow.
all absolutely in awe and fear of him. And he actually did so, going different ways down the corridor.
Yes.
And Bill Nick said, "Hello, Glenn," and he was like, didn't know what to say. It was just incredible.
Oh,
But we got on very well, and I grew to get to know him very well, and it
yes,
was a
indeed.
privilege to be in that position.
An absolute privilege. And I think you once quoted, and I think I've got these words right. I'd only been a journalist for 6 months, and I was the local newspaper's sports editor. It was a dream job, getting paid to watch Spurs play all over Europe as well, I hasten to add, particularly when you're a Spurs fan yourself. Harry, a dream indeed. I mean, what grounds and indeed matches were your highlights at the time? You must have been some fabulous stadiums, particularly in Europe at that time.
Well, I'm not even sure if I ever went abroad prior to that.
Oh,
Back in those days, you wouldn't, would you? I mean, but my passport was full very quickly because Spurs were very successful at that time, the first team to ever win a European trophy, and
indeed.
they had an incredible team at that particular time, and we were always travelling in Europe. It was marvelous occasions. Um,
Indeed, they would be fantastic occasions. What's your favorite British ground, shall we say? I include Scotland here and whatever. Apart from then the old White Hart Lane, of course. What's your favorite British ground?
um, well, back then they were all ramshackled old stadiums. I mean, it
Well, look at
was
Stamford Bridge. Oh dear, speaks
blimey. I mean,
volumes.
what was your favourite ground? But White Hart Lane had a magic for me because I was
Mm,
there from a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, going up those
indeed.
steps with your season ticket. It was just magical, really was. The atmosphere was, and I just couldn't believe that clubs would ever move from those traditional homes. Would anyone move from Highbury, White Hart Lane, and it just
Yes, it is
begs belief
bizarre.
that you would, because there was so many ghosts that lived there.
Exactly.
You didn't want that ever to leave. But times move on, and stadiums now are unbelievable. Just unrecognisable
Yeah.
from back then.
Yeah, we're quite fortunate, aren't we, in this country because we've got some of the best stadiums in the world, haven't we, really? I mean, there's obviously some great stadiums around the world, Europe and other countries, but we have some wonderful stadiums here.
Well, I don't know
Fitting for
whether you've been
World
to the
Cups.
new Tottenham Stadium, but
I
I
haven't
have
personally
been.
been there. No, I haven't.
Well, I've been there as a fan to watch some games as a guest of somebody in the executive
Mm.
areas, and then there was an event there, and I went on a tour of the stadium, and it was just unbelievable. You know, there was a room, a designated room, which was a cigar room for the
Oh, right.
executives.
Wonderful.
I mean, it was just, and the facilities. It's just mind-boggling. It's just it's probably the best stadium in the world, and I've been virtually to every ground. You know, it was disappointing to go to the old Maracana,
Mm.
where on TV you'd watch so many great Brazilian teams
Oh,
play,
wow.
and,
Yes.
and to go there when Man United played in the World Club Championships, and to see such a ramshackled old derelict building,
Yes.
it was just such a disappointment.
Yes. It beggars belief, doesn't it? You have this wonderful picture in your mind and you go there and it's just simply not the stadium you thought it was.
No.
It's crazy, really. I have been to the Azteca in Mexico City a couple of times, and that's a nice old stadium. Not quite,
Well,
not.
I was at the Azteca with Diego Maradona's Hand of God, of
Oh,
course,
of course, yes. So you've been there too. Good old ground.
and his wonderful goal, and privileged to have been one of the few journalists to have actually interviewed him in a relaxed one-to-one situation. I
Very
can't imagine
nice.
many have done that.
No, definitely not.
And that's quite an interesting story because I loved Ozzy Ardiles from the moment he came to Spurs and
Mm.
grew to know him very well. And I was on the Daily Mirror and I said to Ozzy, look, Diego's playing for Spurs in a Spurs shirt for your testimonial, Ozzy. This is unbelievable. I've got to, in the Mirror, just interview the guy.
Yes.
Can you please arrange it? And he said, yeah, okay, I'll arrange it. Monte Fresco, I don't know whether people remember Monte Fresco, the world's greatest ever football sports journalist, photographer of all time.
Mm.
So Monty was assigned by me to turn up at the hotel. We both turned up at Diego's hotel where Ozzy was going to pick him up. And the idea was we did an interview with him and some photographic session. And the sports editor assigned a back page, a spread inside, another spread inside. It was
Wow.
volumes of space. We turned up and I saw Ozzy and how are you, Ozzy? He said, I'm very worried. And he was pacing up and down outside the hotel. He said, Diego's arrived. Now, Diego was actually on World Cup duty.
Mm.
And the manager of the Argentinian team told him, you cannot go and play in a testimonial. We are moving from one country to another to play some World Cup warm-up games, and you have got to stay with the squad. And he told the manager, I gave my word to my friend Ozzy, and I'm going to play in his testimonial. So
Wow.
he left the World Cup squad, flew to London immediately after a game. I think it was in Sweden. He was obviously knackered, so he went to the hotel straight to bed.
Wow.
He took the phone off the hook, and he was fast asleep. And Ozzy's pacing up and down, going, "We should now be going off to the ground. Where is he?" And I said to him, "What about my interview, Ozzy?" He said, "Ozzy, no chance, no chance, no interview." He said, "We're going to have to go straight away." So after a couple of hours, and
Mm.
Ozzy was really, really worried. Suddenly, without any introduction, the lift opened, and out came Diego Maradona, followed by 50 people. It was like, you know, the advert about how many people can you get in a Mini?
Yes.
It was like, how many people can you get in a lift?
Oh, great
So
story.
out came Diego Maradona, his wife, his agent,
Oh,
another agent, his masseur, his minders. I mean, they all just spilled out of this lift. And
beggars
I said,
belief,
yeah,
doesn't
there
it?
we go. Let's do the interview. And I said, no, you can't do the interview. I said, what about the picture? Okay, one picture. We went round to the side of the hotel. Monte Fresco took a picture of me, Ozzy, Diego, and his wife. And then I came back and he said, no interview, no time. I said, come on, Ozzy, look, I'll get the sack. Got all these pages to fill. He said, Right, I'm driving Diego to White Hart Lane. Get in the back. So there's Ozzy driving, Diego in the passenger seat, and me in the back. And off we set, hours late to get to White Hart Lane.
Well, great
Have you
story.
ever tried to get to the old White Hart Lane, down the Seven Sisters
Oh,
Road,
nightmare.
down the Seven Sisters Road before the game? It's testimonial,
Yes.
but thousands were locked out of that game. So it's bumper to bumper down the Seven Sisters Road.
Mm.
So I'm stuck there. I'm doing my interview. Ozzy's translating. I've got him for hours in the back of the car. Anyway, people are looking at us going, is that Diego Maradona? I'm going, nah, it can't be. He'd be out on the pitch by now, warming
Yeah.
up. But in those days, no mobile. So we got into the high road, and I said to us, look, you've got to let me out now. I've got to go into the phone box and phone all my story to the Mirror, which I did. I then caught the bus, got there for half time, and watched the rest of the game. And that was how I got my exclusive interview with Diego Maradona.
Oh, what a fantastic story. That's brilliant. And of course, what comes out of that to me is persistence pays off, doesn't it, Harry? If you want your goal, you can see it there. You just persistently keep it going and going and going until you win. That's a wonderful story. It really is. I mean, sports journalism has had more than its share of driven individuals, as we were talking about, really. But few compare with yourself, Harry, which your previous discussions were kind of raised, really. And as a lifelong Tottenham Hotspurs fan, you have spent most of your career in and around the old White Hart Lane, and of course now the new ground too, starting as a reporter on the North London Weekly Herald, as we mentioned before graduating to become one of the country's foremost football journalists. And you had the ear of the then Alan Sugar, Chairman Alan Sugar, during Tottenham's nadir in the 1990s. I mean, there simply has to be some great stories here, Harry, as well. Stories that simply must be told with the great Alan Sugar. Moments, I'm
You've
sure.
got to be joking. At least I didn't get, you're fired.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was a character, wasn't he? And I can remember the days when he was
Oh dear,
there.
I lose sugar. Yeah, well,
Those songs used to ring around the ground, a little bit of sugar makes the Spurs go down, because he was literally a businessman without any football idea, wasn't it? It's incredible, really.
do you think many people know the real Alan Sugar?
Probably not, actually, to be
No.
fair.
He and his wife, me and my wife, we spent many hours together at the
Sure.
Dorchester, the Savoy,
Mm.
having drinks, dinner, going to other restaurants. I don't think many people know him as well as I do. Maybe Nick Hewer does.
Yes.
Maybe one or two of his advisors do. But I love the guy. I think
Yeah.
he's just different class. He is so outwardly gruff and difficult, you would think, to get on with, but inside he's just such a big softie.
I'm sure he is.
He
Yeah.
no, but he is. Trust
Yeah.
me.
Oh, I do.
And all this about whether he had Spurs at heart, he did have Spurs at heart,
Mm.
and he wanted them to succeed. He thought Terry Venables and he were the dream team until I, showed him otherwise. Well, or he showed me otherwise.
Mm.
You know, but what would you like to know about him? I don't.
No, not really. I mean, I just mentioned Alan Sugar because he's a character, and of course, the "You're Fired" it's always very inspirational. He'll be remembered for that for all of his life, I imagine. But you
The
read
only thing I
stories.
can tell you is
Yeah.
he did contact me, and it's probably why he doesn't like me anymore. He did say, "Look, I'm doing a new program called The Apprentice,
Mm.
and the idea is blah 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 blah." And I said, "Oh, that'll never take off."
Oh, it certainly did. Oh, it took off big time, didn't it? So
Yeah,
yeah.
perhaps I shouldn't tell you that because I mean,
No,
but
it's a great
anyway.
story, isn't it? And just be honest and tell the stories as they are. It's fantastic. I mean, as the multiple award-winning football writer, your byline has appeared on the London Evening News, Daily Mail, Daily Mirror, Daily and Sunday Express, the Daily Star, and Star on Sunday back pages. I mean, it's an amazing career, Harry, isn't it? I mean, what editorial, though, out of all of those, did you prefer to write for? Or you just wrote the same stories for all? I mean, how did you manage
Well,
that?
even now, I'm stopped in the street and people still think I write for the Daily Mirror. I
Mm,
mean, I was there writing for them for 20 years,
yes.
but obviously nearly 10 with the Express and 4 or 5 years with the Daily Mails. But people still associate me with the Daily Mirror, and I still get comments to this day. They enjoyed my writing in the Daily Mirror. People associate me with the Daily Mirror. It's just a shame that the Daily Mirror don't associate themselves with me anymore, because it's not the Daily
Yeah.
Mirror, it's Reach, different owners, different
Yes.
editors, sub-editors. You'd have to ask them why they don't really reach out to me at Reach. But Sean Custis, who's my sports editor on the Express, we have a regular dialogue, and I do all my extracts of my books with him
Mm.
because he's someone I've worked with and I trust. So we work very well together.
That's fantastic. I was in my local pub actually the other night, and I mentioned to my local publican, a chap called Johnny George, and I said, "Oh, I've got Harry Harris on my show on Thursday." Oh, I love Harry Harris. I just love reading his sports articles. So it's nice to hear that, isn't it? It's
Well, it's
wonderful.
nice to hear someone loves me.
Yeah. I'm sure you got loads of fans out there with your editorial. I'm sure you have. I mean, you also appeared on all the major TV news and sports channels, Harry, which include actually Richard and Judy, for example, Newsnight, BBC News, ITN News at 10, Sky, and of course Setanta as well. Plus, you've been interviewed on Football Focus, appeared on the original Hold the Back page, and Jimmy Hill's Sunday Supplement on Sky TV. What a program that was! Not forgetting regular radio slots, of course, on Radio 5 Live, Radio 4, and Talk Sports. So you could say you are a true all-rounder when it comes to media coverage, Harry, couldn't you? Really, you've done it all.
Well, I mean, you probably know yourself. I've been on GB News twice this week,
You have.
probably be on another once or twice, talking about the football regulator, talking about
Mm,
gay footballers.
yes.
I'm on regularly on GB News, and delighted to be so. They want to know my opinion on a wide range of subjects,
Yes.
which cross over from news and sport. So still going strong there. I've written 90 books, as you know. I've got one or two coming out, maybe three this year.
We'll talk about those later in the show. I mean, you
Good.
really
I
are
hope so,
active.
hopefully.
Yes, we will. Absolutely going to do that. So you're kind of an icon really within sports writing, aren't you? Really, in journalism, media work around the game, really are. Some might say you're somewhat the oracle, even. So that's a great accolade to have. I mean, you won 24 industry awards over a 40-year career in newspapers. Your accolades include the SJA Scoop of the Year, and I know you had many scoops, award for breaking the news of Roy Keane leaving the Republic of Ireland's 2002 World Cup squad. I mean, what a story. So please tell us more about that scoop, Harry, the Roy Keane one. And of course, what other major scoops did you find and report on too? Let's have a bit of a scoop discussion.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm probably the only football journalist to have won Scoop of the Year
Mm.
twice.
Yes.
But it really wrangles with me. I didn't get the hat trick because there was one or two stories,
Yeah.
breaking the story about Paul Merson taking drugs and his
Oof.
alcoholism, and,
Yes.
and advising him to come clean and admitting it and confessing to it, which I told him would save his club and club
Yes.
and international career, which he did, and which it did work for him. And breaking that story we've talked about, Alan Sugar, Terry
Yes.
Venables, and all that sort of stuff. Many people have said, well, how could that not possibly have won the Scoop of the Year award? But there was a lot at that time,
Mm.
people who were friends of Terry Venables, of course,
Yes.
and judging and on the committees and all that sort of stuff. It was very political. So the ones that got away are the ones that I think of more than the ones that I actually got the awards for.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it, really? But that's life, I suppose, in some ways too. There are other people doing other scoops. You can't be the only person winning them, and but that would have been a great story. We'll come on to just a little bit about that in a moment. So I've got that listed here as to what happened at Spurs in those days. But before that, in your desire to chase a story, Harry, and it's great to chase a story. I kind of like that myself in a way as well. You have raced a former Spurs boss around the White Hart Lane cinder track. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, what a fascinating and somewhat unique experience that must have been. And why? Why race a Spurs boss around the White Hart Lane cinder track?
Now you're talking about this new book there, aren't you?
Well, sort of, yes.
You've seen this on the back cover of the book, haven't you?
I've done my research, Harry, you see.
You have.
So,
I'm very impressed.
yes.
Why race Terry Venables around the track? Well, look, football journalism back then was such a different kettle of fish than it is now. It was
Yeah.
personal.
Mm.
Now it's remote. It's all this garbage you see on social
Oh,
media. It's journalists guessing. It's
yes.
having a little stab at things, and I call it the dartboard syndrome. You throw
Yeah.
enough darts at the dartboard, you might actually hit double top.
Yes.
But in those days, it was personal. So I would go to White Hart Lane to see the managers, and Terry Venables was the manager. It was the summer, it was pre-season, and I played football and thought I was fit, and Terry was sort of like still in his prime, very young man,
Yes, he was.
and I don't know what possessed me. I said, "Why don't we have a little race around the track?"
And he accepted.
He did, but we started off, and it's a long track. It's a big track when you're actually running against someone who is as fit as as Terry Neal was at that time. But of course, I wasn't bad at sprinting, so we took off, and I was quite well ahead going round the first bend. But it's a marathon, not a sprint, and he caught up and overtook me. So unfortunately, at the end, it looks as though I was way behind. But he was very worried for most of that race.
A good race and a good experience and a good story to tell, isn't it? Let's be honest. They're the sort of things that don't happen in today's games now, today's
No,
sports.
there's no chance of chasing Pep Guardiola around the track
No,
at Man City. I don't think so.
that's never going to happen, is it, in a month of Sundays, sadly. I mean, you also helped, and we're coming on to this now, in the dismissal of another Spurs boss following a Daily Mirror exclusive. Fantastic, like these exclusives and these scoops. Firstly, who was the Spurs boss? I think we can work it out. Well, you know who it is. And secondly, how did the exclusive come about, Harry? I mean, tell us the background to all of
Well,
this.
you're talking about George Graham, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, I thought you might be. Well, I was actually sitting in the press box in Monte Carlo covering a Super Cup game. I think Chelsea were playing in that game. And I rang Alan Sugar to find out the latest position of his managerial search and who was appointing. And I knew that George Graham was in the frame among two or three others. And I think, I don't know whether you recall, but the Spurs fans at the time were chanting, "We don't want George Graham."
Yes.
But whatever it was, what Alan Sugar said to me was, "Look, I've appointed managers in the past, they haven't worked. So I've got some experts, I've got some Spurs players, I've got some people who you would trust within the industry. So I'm asking their opinion." And they told me George Graham was the best in the business at the time. Hard to argue with that
Oh,
because,
very.
very hard to argue after what he'd done at Arsenal. I just said to him, Spurs fans aren't going to take to an ex-Arsenal boss,
They're not.
ex-Arsenal player of that degree. We've done enough with Terry Neal, and they're not going to take to him. It's going to end in grief. I'm telling you, Alan, it might look good, might taste good, but it won't. Yeah, it's going to give you indigestion.
Yes.
And he gave me the usual answer: "Bugger off! I know what I'm doing. I've got all these experts on the board. I'm appointing George Graham." I said, "No, no worries. I filed the story from Monte Carlo, covering something completely different. George Graham will be the new manager. Fine." Wasn't long before George Graham was creating the kind of Terry Venables syndrome of waves. I'm not getting the players I want. I'm not getting the finance I want. That's why I'm not as successful as I want to be. The Spurs vice chairman at the time wasn't very impressed by this. And in fact, eventually I got the impression that something was going on. And I got in touch with the guy, and he said, "Look, I've spoken to George Graham. I don't accept what he's saying, and we're going to get rid of him." So I was able to break that story as well.
Good story. And I expect a lot of Spurs fans were happy with that, I guess,
Delighted.
Oh, absolutely. The hatred between Arsenal and Spurs is well, deep, isn't it?
It is.
Never heal. It'll always be there. I think it's
Come
fair to...
Sunday, we will see even more so, I think.
Oh, yeah, of course. It's a North London derby again. Wow, cracking. What a match that will be. I think it's fair to say you can count many who have occupied the Spurs hot seat among your closest friends, you've intimated early on in the show, in the game. From Bill Nicholson through to Jose Mourinho, of course, you have met them all. What about Jose? He was an inspirational manager, wasn't he? Did it all at Chelsea. not really doing too much at the moment. What did you think of Jose? I think he's an inspiring character myself, I have to say.
Well, I've written 5 books about Jose Mourinho, and
Yeah,
I
I
wouldn't have
know.
done that unless I thought it was an inspiring
Exactly.
character. I think when I first started writing about him in the books as well as writing about the stories about him, I
Yes.
described him like Brian Clough on speed. It was like here's just an unbelievable character that's
Ah,
capable of anything, and I didn't realise how much he was capable of. But I've seen recent clips of Brian Clough, and it reminded me when fans invaded the pitch, which really Brian Clough did not like, and he actually went on the pitch and thumped 2 of them. Do you remember that?
I do
He
remember
actually
that.
pinned
Yes.
2, yeah. And Jose Mourinho wasn't adverse to poking a coach in the eye at Real Madrid, was he?
No,
So
he wasn't. Similar
um,
character.
yeah, but it just illustrates how fiery he was, how passionate this guy is.
Yeah.
But behind the scenes, he's just so much a family man, so much intent about his family. The first person he would ring when he wins a major trophy is his wife.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Um, and how much he involves his daughter in whatever he's doing. He is a very complex character and well worthy of the 4 books, I think.
Oh, without doubt, without doubt. And I'm sure that, I will probably get around to reading them actually, Harry, because I'm sure they're cracking stories. Jose Mourinho actually is a individual, as a coach, as a manager, I'd like on this show at some point, maybe be able to help me get him on, because he would make a great show, Jose Mourinho, he really would. Absolutely fascinating character. Really got a lot of time for Jose. Long may he continue in doing what he does. Quite simple, isn't it, really?
Sure, he will, and
Yes.
he's not going to change much.
No, he
He
won't.
may- No,
He's born the way he is, and that's it.
no,
Fantastic.
he
Well, he's an
came back.
individual,
He
isn't he?
came back a second time to Chelsea, saying he was a changed man, but
No,
I
he
didn't
wasn't.
believe it, and I don't think anybody else did.
No, I certainly didn't. Because the old saying, a leopard doesn't change its spots and things like that. Uh, no way was Jose Mourinho going to change.
No.
He is who he is, and a very interesting character and a great coach as well.
And here's my thought:
Yes.
could any manager ever come back to a club for a third time?
Well, that's a good thought, isn't it? If they've been there twice before, the chances of a third trip back to a club it's got to be limited, isn't it? Really, I think with Jose Mourinho though, to go back to Chelsea a third time is a possibility. And the reason why I say that, he's actually loved at the club by everybody that knew him. The supporters would welcome him back with open arms. I think the majority of them. So that would be a
Hence, I
possibility.
pose that question for you.
Yeah,
Could a manager ever come back for a third time?
I
So
think
if ever anyone could, it would be him.
it would be him, and I think Jose Mourinho would say yes to it as well if the conditions were right.
Oh,
He'd be
would it? I
welcomed
mean, he
by the
hasn't moved.
supporters.
He
I
still
know.
he still lives in West London.
He does. He loves it.
He loves Chelsea.
He does. And to have him back at the Stamford Bridge, who knows?
The
That
fans
would be
love
a
him.
great,
Fans love
great.
him.
They do. He's a god at Chelsea, and to have him back there, at Stamford Bridge, is a logical thing to happen.
So if they
Will it
think of
happen?
changing the current manager,
Mm,
we've seen all the candidates they've put forward.
yeah,
None of them would satisfy anyone other than the guy we're talking about.
indeed. Jose's the man, as they say. So let's see what happens in the summer, end of the season. You never know. Anything can happen in football, and it usually does. Then in 2020, you joined Phil and Nick on the BBC Sport London to look back on the 1990 World Cup. You talked about Gazza's tears. We've mentioned earlier on, of course, about Diego Maradona, the penalty misses, and David Platt's last-minute winner against Belgium. Oh, do I remember that? What a lot of fun that show must have been, because that 1990 World Cup was something, wasn't it? It had everything for everybody to dislike and enjoy at the same time. It was full of it, wasn't it, really?
Well, I wrote a recent book about it, and what I
Yes,
did is I interviewed every player that was in the England squad
indeed.
to talk about their dressing room experiences, and how fascinating that turned out to be. It was a great insight to football at that time, that era.
Indeed.
You couldn't replicate it now. It doesn't, not possible. It's just
No.
so changed so much. But what went on behind the scenes was just incredible.
Yes.
And of
Yeah, I
course,
can
I
understand
was
that.
there, and I experienced most of it. It was one of the most gratifying experiences of my life.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
my
did hear a
only
story about Gascoigne or Gaza coming out one day, all the England players around a pool, and he went up to the diving board, dressed up or in some kind of outfit, and launched himself off the top of the diving board, come out the pool, and walked back inside or Gabba to get a drink. I mean, he was crazy, wasn't he, Paul Gascoigne? What a character he was, really funny, full
well,
of fun.
I've probably one of the few people have known him for as long as I have done. You know, it's
Mm,
and it's just exploit after exploit. You know, everyone's got their favourite Gascoigne story, and
I have.
I've just written a book now. You're going to come to, and someone's talking about their favourite Gascoigne story that I've never heard.
Mm,
There is always a new one,
there
and
is
there is a
indeed.
new one in my new book.
Well, so what in that book is called? So let the listeners know so they can go out and grab it. What's the book called,
Well,
Harry?
it's a book I've written with Paul Trevelyan,
Yes.
and it's a book that is in kind of like an art form,
Oh, we're
and
coming on to that.
yeah, it's a unique kind of concept.
Yeah, we'll
So
come on to
let's
that
wait till you
shortly.
come on to that then, if
Yeah,
you
we'll
want.
come on to that shortly. I thought perhaps it might have been another book, but that's
No,
fine.
no, that's the
I
one.
mean, who did you admire amongst your contemporaries as well, Harry? And who gave you the inspiration as a sports writer? Who? There must have been someone behind you, I guess, that was inspiring you to write or to be great in the game, really, as a sports journalist. So, who did you admire as your contemporaries?
Well, you probably don't remember him, but Vic Rowton,
No, I
the
don't.
Evening News, you know, he was a legend at his time, and he took me under his wing and he showed me a few little tricks of the trade. But the inspiration was really the football itself.
Mm,
You know, the desire to find out more about it, and the more you go behind the scenes, the more fascinating it becomes. So, was there anybody doing that kind of thing at that time? I don't think there was. You know,
mm,
football was more about the game. It was about the match report. It was about the follow
of
up, the
course.
quotes, the comments. It wasn't very much about the investigation about what people were up to.
Mm,
So it was a kind of niche thing that I took up, which was good at the time. But now everyone's into that kind of thing.
they
Well,
are. Yes.
everyone, but at least there is more of it. You know, you have these kind of like internet people who are dishing out all kinds of documents that can prove all sorts of things. At that time, I was a lone voice
Mm,
with lone documents. And to be perfectly blunt, the media, my colleagues, rival papers, detested that kind of thing. They thought I was out of order by looking into people that we all considered to be, we weren't quite friends, but people who were friendly.
mm,
But they were friendly towards the media for that particular reason. You know, keep your enemies on side. You know, keep them close
absolutely.
to
Always keep your enemies close to you. Absolutely. It's a very true statement. And then there have been the books. Now, we must get, this is a wonderful part of your life. And we'll talk about some of your wonderful books that you've written previously in a moment. But first, and it's important to say, you haven't finished yet. And with writing still very much your honoured craft and delicacies of the written word, you're now writing and producing a new and unique book in collaboration with the genius artist, of course, Paul Trevelyan, who himself was on the show just a few weeks ago. Can you please tell us all about this fantastic new project? Wonderful
you.
book.
I don't know whether the new generation know Paul Trevelyan as well as they should do, but they should do because he's
Oh,
such a genius. You know,
he is.
his graphics, his drawings, his
Oh,
artwork of sportsmen, particularly footballers we're talking about now in this book. You know, he's the master of motion. So it's not just two-dimensional. He has the ability to produce this artwork that looks three-dimensional. So putting the two of us together, and of course he's a great Spurs fan as I am.
he is.
I don't, I don't know. It's about 150 years between us supporting Spurs. It's just incredible. But it's full of his drawings, his memorabilia, personal photographs with all the people that we're writing about. It is really a unique book that we're producing as a limited edition, and
Mm,
whatever the publishers are charging for each edition, it's going to be worth 10 times as much
incredible.
because it is really something special.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it because I know you're very in with this book at the moment, obviously with Paul, and you're really excited about its release. And it was once said, and I talked about it with Paul on the show here a few weeks ago, that a graphic artist at Disney once said that what Paul captures in one drawing would take the best of us, the rest of us, about 24 drawings to complete. So that sort of says everything about how great Paul Trevelyan is as an artist, and with yourself as well as the renowned, journalist that you are, Harry. The both of you together, both good friends and both Tottenham supporters. I mean, it's a great project, isn't it? Working on that together. It's got to
Well,
be a lot of fun.
it's been a joy to do it. I mean,
Oh,
it's just and it's a history of Spurs through Paul's art, and he goes back to
tremendous.
drawing Churchill. But I
Yes.
mean, he's certainly drawn Spurs legends from the 50s. But it's a personal history. I mean,
Mm,
his personal stories about meeting his players and talking to them, and how he got the insight to draw them.
wow.
Of course, my insight into all these characters, we've been talking about Bill Nicholson, many others.
Of course.
So it is a history that you've never read before.
And when is this book going to be published? When's it out? This year? Obviously later on this year. How do people get to buy it? How do?
Well, here's an exclusive for you. It's
Oh, okay.
available as of today.
Wow, there we are. As of today, folks, 25th of April, 2024, you can now purchase this amazing book by Harry Harris and the quite genius, of course, Paul Trevelyan. Get
Well,
out
the
and
actual
purchase
publication date is June the 12th,
June the
and
12th.
the former Spurs vice chairman has offices in Mayfair, and we're going there with some Spurs legends. And Paul
Interesting.
is handing over some of his artwork to them personally, signed. That's the official publication date, but it's now being actually printed in Turkey as we speak, and it will be
Fantastic.
arriving back in England next week. And on the publisher's website, you can purchase it. But that's the only
Fantastic.
way you can.
Brilliant.
It's a limited edition. It's £25 signed copies,
Mm.
but signed copies, I think you'd end up putting them on eBay for 10 times the amount.
Yeah, without doubt. Sounds like it's going to be a bestseller. And say limited edition. Get out and buy a book now. That's my advice because
If you can, if there's
you
any
can,
left.
yeah. Yeah, or snap a one if you can from somewhere. So it's got to be done, hasn't it? It's a fantastic book in the making, really
Well,
is.
it's not on Amazon yet. I mean, eventually, it will be probably the paperback edition, but the hardback is a limited edition print,
Hmm.
and no one really knows that. But I can tell you that there are now dozens already sold, and there won't be many left.
No, absolutely, success indeed in a hardback. Congratulations, that'd be a fantastic story, fantastic book to read. You have won almost as many awards, Sir Harry, as Sir Alex Ferguson has won trophies. In fact, you have actually written more books than Sir Alex has won silverware. Many journalists turn to book writing as a, well, not always lucrative sideline, and no one can compare, surely, with your prolific self, Harry. So let's dig a little deeper. You have been the author of no fewer than 80 football-related books, including autobiography, collaborations, biographies, and official club annuals. You have written with or about a diverse collection of players and managers, including George Best, Glenn Hoddle, Jurgen Klinsmann, Gianluca Vialli, God bless him, Jose Mourinho, Ruud Gullit, Paul Merson, Gary Mabbitt, of course, Steve McMahon, Terry Neal, Bill Nicholson, and of course Pele. The list is endless. Some big names there, Harry, isn't there, really? So please enlighten us more here. Who was your favourite interview with and why? First question.
Well, I'm sorry to say, but it's got to be Pele.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say
It's
that.
got to be Pele,
What a
and
gentleman he was.
it's you know. It was funny because I was at La Manga having a little brief holiday, and I'm reading a book about Brazilian football, and there wasn't very much about Pele. And I rang my literary agent and I just said, there must be a library of Pele books,
Mm.
but I'd love to write a book about Pele. And he said, of course there'd be a library of Pele books. Anyway, he rang me the next day, And so there's one Pele book. It was written in Portuguese in 1979. Not very good with the translation, and that was it.
Wow. Good
So I
heavens.
said, well, I'm not going to write one unless he endorses it. So next time I saw him, and I've seen him many times, I just said to him, and he was actually having a little bit of a dip at that time. He was being ostracised by FIFA.
Mm,
He had some political aspirations, and he wasn't at his peak in terms of global football off the
yes.
field. And I just said to him, look, I want to write your life story. And he looked at me and he got up. So I got up and he gave me a great big hug. And he said, I can't believe anyone wants to write my life story.
Really, that's unbelievable, isn't it?
And obviously, we met up many times around the world.
Yes.
And I interviewed him many times about the book. I sent him the book and he sent me back some corrections. And, it's such an honor and privilege. I wouldn't say I'm his official biographer, but many people would assume that, given those circumstances, that's his official biography.
Indeed. Written by no other than Harry Harris. What a fantastic character Pele was. It really was. I mean, as a club reporter at Tottenham Hotspur, you met legendary Tottenham boss, as we've mentioned earlier, Bill Nicholson, forming a friendship that would lead you to write the Yorkshireman's autobiography after his retirement. And of course, he didn't want to write it, as you said earlier in the show. I mean, tell us a little bit more about your friendship with Bill Nicholson, because it's obviously quite a deep one.
Well, we just got on,
Yeah.
He just kind of like took this junior journalist under his wing. It was just incredible. But back in those days, I would go to the training ground and I'd sit behind the goal and I'd chat to a couple of the players who weren't playing in the training session or were injured. You had so much greater access. You'd go down to the canteen, get a cup of tea and talk to the players. You had more freedom. You travel with the players. You stay in the same hotel, travel on the plane, see them on the carousel collecting their luggage and talk to them. You get to know them. I don't think anyone knows anyone these days. They're all super multi-billionaires and superstars that don't want to know the media. They don't need the media. They've got social media. They've got their multitude of agents and other outlets. They don't need to project themselves through the media. They don't need to give any interviews to the media. They can put it on social media and put their point of view there.
They certainly can. That's the way it is now in the modern day, isn't it? That's how it's worked out now, sadly. But,
so I really enjoyed what occurred then. What happened then was something special to actually get to know these people. So I got to know Bill. It was funny the way he told me in great detail why he quit. And that was all in his book eventually. But I think it was very sad the way he was treated by the board. They asked him to stay on to help him with the appointment. Then he stayed on to help with the transition rather than having these temporary managers. But then they didn't actually ask his opinion. He wanted to get Johnny Giles in, Terry Butcher in, to make some important signings and get some right people in. And they appointed Terry Neal.
unbelievable, isn't it?
And I bumped into poor old dear old Sidney Whale, the chairman, in the car park a week after the appointment of Terry Neal, and just caught him there. And as a local journalist, just interview him about his appointment. And we were chatting away, and I said, "Did you know he played for Arsenal and managed Arsenal and was an Arsenal man?" "No," he said. "Blimey, was he?"
Funny story, isn't it? It's great to hear people's reactions like that.
Oh dear, you couldn't make that up.
You couldn't make it out. It was another great story. It's funny, isn't it? And of course, getting back to Pele, and in 2018, an updated edition of Pele, His Life and Times, was published to coincide with the 2018 World Cup. While in the same year, an updated version of your highly successful Down Memory Lane, a Spurs fan's view of the last 50 years, was also published. I mean, they're two great books. That's inspirational in 2018, isn't it, Harry?
Well, the publishers never cease to amaze me by wanting to keep updating these books. So, it's not a question of writing new ones. I spend half the time updating the old ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. Fine by me. You mentioned 80, but I'm up to 90 now.
Well, you can't put that pen down, can you?
No.
All my research work's slightly out of date by 10 books, but there you go. You probably
Well,
wrote
it
them
will be
last
in 10
night.
minutes' time as well, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's great. You're a worthy writer, and the fact you're still doing it is brilliant. And keep going with the books, Harry, because that's great.
Well, people don't realise this, but I'm still writing for the papers because I mentioned I'm still doing stuff for the Sun. I do stuff for the Times. I work with the Telegraph. Ben Rumsley called me in a couple of years ago to help him with some investigations. I've helped him with the investigation on the Emiliano Sala
Yep.
crash, and I've written a book about that as a consequence, and that's been updated 2 or 3 times. I'm now in the progress of writing a 3-part drama
Whoa,
about it. And this
fantastic.
isn't about football, it's about true crime. And there's a couple of broadcasters desperate to get their hands on this.
Wonderful.
We've interviewed the Cardiff City owner, Vincent Tan. He doesn't give many interviews, and it's an extensive interview about what happened, about his life at Cardiff. It's a fascinating interview with him. Also an interview with the club chairman, and we're interviewing very many other people involved in it. But this is, I mean, you can guess what you can guess by where I'm coming from by the title. It's called The Killing of Emiliano Sala.
Yeah,
And
that was a sad story.
that word has been produced with a great deal of thought. This wasn't an accident.
No, and I think everybody does realise that now, and and it's extremely sad story that really is. You've got to feel for his family and Cardiff City at the time. I mean,
Yeah. So
dreadful.
I'm working on that film, but that's not the first. I've produced 4 other films. I'm in numerous documentaries. I'm now the sports development director at SmartFrame.
Nice.
It proves you're never too old to be in new technology.
Absolutely.
I'm in new tech. Come
Yes.
on, I'm in new tech. It must be funny, surely. That's worth
Well,
a laugh. Isn't it?
Well, certainly is.
Yeah, well,
We
I'm in
all
new
use
tech.
it. We all use it as media individuals,
No,
on it all the time.
But this isn't just new tech. This is
No.
revolutionizing photography and the photographic image. It's taken out the dark ages. It's taken away from the people who've been exploiting clubs,
Yes.
players, and even the fans exploiting their images. There's 3 billion images a day on the internet. 2.8 billion of them are stolen.
Yes, of course they are. Sad
So
story.
you can't steal them with SmartFrame. It has authenticity status, so you can't fake it with AI, and you can't distort it. And within the image, you can produce advertising.
Nice. Sounds like an interesting technology, which I'm sure Paul Trevelyan is very good at using as well. With all his wonderful work he does.
I'm not sure at the age of 90 he's into new tech. I'm just a youngster.
Yeah, of course you are. I said that with tongue in cheek, actually, to be honest. But I'm sure Paul would like to know about it. I'm sure he does know about it. But yeah, wonderful stuff. I mean, in addition, you've also written All the Way Jose, Chelsea Century, and a number of Manchester United's books, and not just Spurs books, Harry. Either you have gone across the board with other clubs.
Oh no! It's just not Spurs. I've written about Leicester City winning the Premier League, Leicester City winning the FA Cup.
Yes.
I've even written Arsenal books. Now, that takes some credit, doesn't it?
So it certainly does.
Paul Merson's story. I've written Terry Nill's book. I've written annuals about Arsenal. You as a journalist, you're supposed to be unbiased. So
you are. You're professional. You can't lose those opportunities either.
Deadly Doug on Aston Villa.
Wonderful.
I've written Newcastle book when Wood went up to Newcastle. Cardiff City books, as we talked about.
Yeah, indeed.
So definitely just not Spurs books.
And that's great
I've
to
written
hear.
Numerous Man United books.
You have, yes. I've noticed that actually when I was doing the research work.
Liverpool books.
Yeah. Brilliant. You're known all over the world as the sports editor, writer, across the football world, aren't you, really? It's a big name, Harry Harris. It really is. Wonderful name. You're also the last journalist. This is a nice story, but sad at the same time, of course. You're also the last journalist to interview George Best for his final book, Hard Tackles and Dirty Barbs. Now, that must have been some interview, Harry. The great George Best, that some people would still say was the best player in the world. And one of the top players, wasn't he? Definitely. You could put him alongside Pele and Maradona.
Well, how could you not? I mean, and I was privileged to go to his memorial service in Belfast, invited by the family. Yes, I wrote his last book, so I was the last journalist to interview him. But it was a rather strange series of interviews because he was commissioned to write this book about the games he'd played in, the managers and the players, in the 70s and 80s. And of course, he had no recollection of it, very vague anyway. I spent most of his time talking about his escapades with his girlfriends and the husbands that were chasing him, this sort of stuff. It was fascinating, and I went to see him at one of his rehab places that he was staying at, and but we spent hours talking about football, but mostly about the current Man United situation, although a few years back, rather than the past. And he just said, "Look, Harry, you can do all the research for me, I'm sure." So I did.
That's fascinating. What a great story. Yeah, sad story as well, isn't it, with George Best? To be honest,
He never got to see that book.
No, and that's even more sad, isn't it? Really?
No, and of course they had a writer, a publisher, to do
Yes.
this trilogy. It was 3 books he was doing. One was his autobiography. One was an anecdotal book, and then they had the third, and they go what they really wanted to do. But this was about all the games, etc., which he had very vague recollection about. But they had a particular writer who was doing the 3, and they were paying him, even at that time, an absolute fortune. But they didn't want me to write it. But George came to see me. We were at an event for Alan Hudson, who was publicising his book. He sat next to me. His agent was there, and he said, "Harry, look, I need your help. I want you to write this last book. I can't stand this author anymore. He's driving me mad. I can't do it. Would you do it for me?" I said, "George, I'll do anything for you." "Yeah, I'll do it." We went to see the publisher, and I knew how much they were paying this other author. Then I said, "Pay me the same, it's fine. I'm not asking for more or less." They said, "No, we don't want you to write the book. He's contracted to write the book." And George said, "Contracted or not, I'm not doing it." So they offered me a 5th of the fee. Don't get me wrong, back in those days, it was still a big fee. But a 5th. And it was kind of like an insult. So I said to George, "Look, it's not really the money. I want to write your book. Because I enjoy your football, as most millions do, but absolutely. I particularly want to write it. And I usually, all these books you're talking about, usually come from me, not people coming to me to commission me. Yes. It's books I want to write." So I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. Get the fee, give me your signed shirt, and I'll do it." And he did.
Wonderful story. Yeah, you had an impression on everybody, it seems, over the years, haven't you, Harry? And the great George Best.
Apparently, so I'm not sure he's one good, but there you go.
Well, nobody's all good, are they? Let's be honest. So there's always a bad story or
but
two.
What really got me was that because it was George Best's book, he had the royalties. I didn't. I was just given a flat rate fee.
Yeah.
So George died, hadn't seen the book, and the agent said, rang me up. He said, "Look, Harry, we've got a problem. George Best has died bankrupt. He can't pay his hospital fees.
Oh dear, oh dear.
So, look, if you promote the book and we can sell the book, he's got a series of already agreed, signed up promotional work to do. Would you do some of it?" And I said, "Sure." And there's no fee for me because I'm not getting a royalty on the book.
No.
So the first one I did was Sky. I did a massive interview. It must have been half an hour, maybe an hour, talking about George Best's life, talking about the book, etc., etc. And some real arsehole on the Daily Mail decided to write in his column that I was profiteering by George Best's death.
Oh dear, oh dear. Where do these people live? Where do they come from, these people? It's real gutter.
Under some rock.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gutter. It's terrible.
Why not ask me? Why not ask the publisher? Why not ask his agent? Why not check your facts? No. Doesn't like me particularly.
Yeah.
Just puts it in the paper. Anyway, I sued them.
quite
and
right too.
they paid up.
Good for you, Harry. Good for you. Well
You know,
done.
it's a kind of journalism that is really
Gutter.
obnoxious to me.
Gutter press. You know, it's terrible. And as you said earlier on, there's more of those stories around these days, you know, fake news, stories that's just made
I'll
up,
tell you who it
you
was,
know.
Des Kelly.
Oh, really? Shame on Des Kelly. That's all I can say.
Well,
Shame on him.
and it's not the only thing that Des Kelly has done that he should be ashamed of. I know much more about that.
Mm.
But
Well,
there's a lot of these type of people that gravitate to journalism. You know,
they
it's
do. We meet them quite often in life too, don't we? So they are around, sadly. But that's part of life and we have to live with it.
indeed.
And in your case, sadly, you had to put up with a story that wasn't true, and thankfully, you had the insight to go out and win the case.
Yeah, so hurtful.
Yeah, it is hurtful, and I'm sure it probably still hurts you now because it doesn't ever
Well, obviously,
evaporate.
because I wouldn't mention it. You know,
No,
it's
indeed, yeah.
these type of lies. You know, it's
Oh,
just simply check your facts. There's so many
absolutely right.
people you could just check that with.
Yeah, he was just after a quick, cheap scoop, wasn't he? You know, and get it printed, and of course, it all went pear-shaped for him, which is the right thing. That's good.
Indeed.
Also, not forgetting the books you've written that include, and I've got to bring this up, the history of the Wags, from the
Oh
humble,
God, I
from the
wish you
humble.
hadn't.
Oh no, it's a great thing, isn't it? From the humble marriage of England captain Billy Wright, great story, to one of the Beverley sisters. Well, that's a nice story too. To the glamour of Bobby and Tina Moore. Wow, and the rise of Posh and Becks as well. I mean, there seems to be no end to your talent, Harry, does there really?
Well, it shows I've got a sense of humour.
It does. And you do have a sense of humour too. Absolutely right, which is coming out in this show. But it's just a never-ending list of wonderful pieces that you've been involved with, written, articulated, as a great journalist and media man that you are. It's brilliant. So congratulations. So what else is on the radar moving forwards? Have you got anything else apart from the Paul Trevelyan piece, of course, that we've talked about earlier on in yourself?
Well, it's been so much joy in doing it, so much pleasure seeing this develop into this art form. That
Yes.
we're now doing the same title, but for Chelsea,
Yep.
and we're looking at Man United and extending it into a series.
Fantastic. Well, a lot to look forward to, haven't we? As the months and years go by, an awful lot to look forward to. And I've just looked at the clock, and you know we've done over an hour, Harry. Can you believe it? It's been a lovely chat. It really has.
I've got
Over
to
an
go
hour.
and replenish my glass.
You have indeed. So, you know, it's that
Pleasure
stage
talking
again.
to you.
Well, stay on for a
Absolute pleasure.
second. As always on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show, we could talk forever, Harry, about your life and amazing life as a top sports journalist and, of course, an influential football columnist for 3 decades, well, 4 decades actually, and one of the most acclaimed investigative journalists of your generation in tabloid, radio, and TV media. It's been a huge pleasure as always, and as always, the pleasure is all mine, and of course the show's audience when this podcast is released on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show and the Lord Russell Baker YouTube channel. So thank you, Harry. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you Harry Harris. Absolute big
Thank
round of
you.
applause.
My pleasure.
You've been an absolute star. You really
Delighted.
have. So I'm going to wrap up the show now. Do you mind us hanging on for a couple of minutes?
Okay,
Replenish your glass actually whilst I'm
I'll
finishing
do that.
up.
I'll do
Absolutely,
that.
top man. Well done, Harry. The next episode on the World of Lord Russell podcast talk show is the 6 times world snooker champion, where my special guest will be Steve Davis, who is an English and retired professional snooker player who is currently a commentator, DJ, electronic musician, and author. Steve Davis is best known for dominating professional snooker during the 1980s when Steve reached 8 World Snooker Championship finals in 9 years, winning 6 world titles and held the world #1 ranking for 7 consecutive seasons. Incredible. Steve Davis was runner-up to Steve Davis, of course, in one of snooker's most famous matches, the 1985 World Championship final, which ended in a dramatic black ball conclusion that attracted 18.5 million viewers. And it's known now, of course, as the Black Ball Final. Still the largest British television audience for any broadcast after midnight and any broadcast on BBC Radio or BBC Two. So another exciting show to look forward to on the World of Lord Russell podcast show, available, of course, on all podcast media platforms and the Lord Russell Baker YouTube channel. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you all on the inside. So until then, it's au revoir from him and au revoir from me.